"Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the pump now." The words cut through the low hum of engines and the faint click of gas nozzles like a switch flipping in a quiet room. And for a second, everything at the station seemed to slow down, like even the air paused to listen. The overhead lights buzzed softly against the late evening sky, casting a pale, almost sterile glow across the concrete as cars idled in neat rows, drivers half distracted, half present, until that voice sharpened the moment into something else entirely. Naomi Reed didn't move right away. Her hand stayed wrapped around the handle of the pump, the faint smell of gasoline mixing with the lingering scent of motor oil on her sleeves, the kind that never quite washes out no matter how many shifts you've worked. Her uniform, faded navy, slightly too big at the shoulders, clung to her like it had been through more than just a long day, and maybe it had. A receipt fluttered near her feet, caught in a small swirl of wind, tapping lightly against her shoe like a nervous heartbeat. Around her, people started to notice. A man by the snack counter turned his head. A woman in an SUV paused mid-text. A teenager lowered his phone just enough to see what was happening without fully admitting he was watching. And then there was him. Officer Ethan Walker stood a few feet away, posture rigid, hand resting near his belt not out of threat, but out of habit, like muscle memory he didn't even think about anymore. His uniform was clean, pressed, everything in place, every line sharp. He looked like someone who believed in order, in rules, in things being exactly where they were supposed to be. His jaw tightened slightly as he watched her, eyes scanning, assessing, deciding. "I said step away." He repeated, slower this time, like patience was already running thin. Naomi finally lifted her gaze. Not fast, not defensive, just steady. Her eyes met his, calm in a way that didn't match the tension building around them. No fear, no rush, just presence. Somewhere behind them, a car door slammed. The sound echoed louder than it should have, like punctuation at the end of a sentence nobody had finished yet. Ethan took a step closer, the faint creak of his boots against the pavement filling the space between them. "We got a report," he said, voice lower now, controlled, like he was explaining something obvious to someone who should already understand. "So let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the pump handle, then relaxed. The numbers on the meter kept ticking upward, gallons and dollars climbing in quiet indifference. She glanced at it for half a second, then back at him. Around them, the silence thickened, not empty, but heavy, like something was about to break through it. A phone lifted somewhere in the crowd, its screen glowing faintly as it began to record, capturing angles, reflections, fragments of truth from a dozen different perspectives. Naomi exhaled slowly, barely noticeable, like she was grounding herself in something deeper than the moment. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Not weak, not uncertain, just quiet enough that people had to lean into it to hear. "You're wrong." The words didn't rise. They didn't challenge. They just landed, simple and direct, like placing a card face up on a table. Ethan's expression flickered, just a fraction, just enough to show something had shifted beneath the surface. Not doubt, not yet, but something close to irritation, maybe even confusion. He wasn't used to that tone. Not here, not like this. A breeze moved through again, carrying the faint rustle of receipts and wrappers, brushing past Naomi's cheek, lifting a strand of hair that had come loose from her tie. The station lights reflected faintly in her eyes, small points of white against something steady and unshaken. No argument followed her words. No explanation. Just silence. And in that silence, the space between them stretched wider than the few feet of concrete it actually was. Behind Ethan, someone whispered, too low to make out, but enough to ripple through the watching crowd like a current. He straightened slightly, shoulders squaring as if resetting himself back into the role he knew. "Step away," he said again, but this time there was a hint of something else beneath it. Not louder, not harsher, just tighter. Naomi slowly released the pump handle. The nozzle clicked back into place with a dull, final sound. She turned toward him fully now, hands relaxed at her sides, posture open, almost patient. The kind of patience that didn't come from waiting, but from knowing. And for a brief moment, just a flicker, Ethan hesitated. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that something inside him shifted, even if he didn't understand why. The lights hummed, engines idled, phones kept recording, and the night held its breath. The click of the nozzle settling back into place sounded louder than it should have, a small mechanical sound echoing across the concrete as if it marked the end of something neither of them had fully said. And for a moment, Naomi Reed simply stood there with her hands relaxed at her sides, shoulders loose, breathing steady, while the faint smell of gasoline lingered in the air and the overhead lights cast a pale glow across her face, softening the edges of a moment that had already drawn too many eyes. Officer Ethan Walker watched her carefully, his gaze narrowing just slightly as if he was trying to reconcile what he expected to see with what was actually in front of him, because nothing about her reaction matched the script he had already written in his head, and that mismatch settled into his chest like a quiet irritation he could not immediately name. Somewhere to the left, a car engine revved and then idled down again, the driver clearly distracted, while a phone camera shifted angles, catching the reflection of the two of them in the polished chrome of a nearby pickup truck, distorted but unmistakable. Ethan cleared his throat, a subtle reset, then took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to reassert control over the space. "I am going to ask you one more time," he said, his tone measured, each word placed carefully as if precision alone could restore order. "Do you have anything on you that does not belong to you?" And the question hung there, heavier than it needed to be, not because of what it asked, but because of what it implied. Naomi did not answer right away, not out of defiance, but because she seemed to be weighing the moment itself, her eyes briefly scanning past him, not to escape, but to take in the scene around them, the rows of cars, the quiet tension in the shoulders of strangers who had suddenly become witnesses, the flicker of fluorescent light above that buzzed like a nervous thought. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket, her movement deliberate, unhurried, the kind that did not invite suspicion but did not rush to avoid it either. And when her hand came back out, it held nothing more than a folded receipt, edges slightly creased, ink faintly smudged, and she extended it toward him without stepping closer, leaving the space between them intact. "I paid," she said softly, her voice even, steady enough that it did not need to rise to be heard. Ethan did not take the receipt immediately, his eyes flicking from her face to the paper and back again, as if searching for something that would justify the tension he had already brought into the moment. And for a fraction of a second, something like hesitation passed through him, subtle enough that no one else would notice, but real enough to register somewhere deeper than pride. Behind him, a woman shifted in her seat, the faint creak of leather audible through the open window of her SUV. And the teenager who had been filming adjusted his grip, the glow of his screen reflecting off his glasses as he leaned in just a little more. Drawn to the stillness that had replaced the earlier spark of confrontation, Ethan finally reached out and took the receipt, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper with a motion that was more careful than he intended, and he glanced down at it quickly, scanning the numbers, the timestamp, the pump number that matched the one behind her, all the small details that quietly aligned in a way that left less room for doubt than he would have preferred. His jaw tightened again, but this time it was different, less about control and more about something slipping just out of reach, and he folded the receipt once, not neatly, just enough to give his hands something to do. Naomi watched him, not with challenge, not with triumph, just with that same steady presence, as if she had already accepted whatever the moment would become before it had fully formed. The lights above flickered once, a brief dip in brightness that cast everything into a softer shadow before returning to their usual hum, and in that split second, the tension seemed to loosen just enough to breathe. Ethan looked back up at her, the edges of certainty in his expression no longer as sharp as they had been, and though he did not say it, the shift was there, small but undeniable, like a crack forming in something that had felt solid only moments before. Around them, the crowd remained, quieter now, less restless, as if they were no longer waiting for something to happen, but watching to see what would change, and in the space between a question asked and an answer understood, something unseen had already begun to move. The paper in Ethan Walker's hand felt thinner than it should have, like it carried less weight than the certainty he had walked in with just minutes earlier, and as he glanced down at the timestamp again, the quiet alignment of numbers pressed against the back of his thoughts in a way that did not leave much room for argument. The pump number matched, the total matched, Even the last 4 digits of the transaction lined up with the display still glowing faintly behind Naomi Reed, and for a brief moment, the only sound between them was the low electric hum of the overhead lights and the distant hiss of a tire being filled with air somewhere across the lot. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, folding the receipt once more, this time more carefully, as if precision might help him reclaim control over a situation that had already begun to slip beyond it. He handed the paper back without stepping closer, his fingers releasing it just before their hands could touch, and Naomi took it with the same calm she had held from the beginning. No change in her expression, no visible shift in her posture, just a quiet acceptance of the moment as it unfolded. Around them, the crowd adjusted again, the tension that had once leaned forward now easing back slightly, though no one fully turned away, because something unfinished still lingered in the air. A truck idled 2 pumps down, its headlights casting long shadows across the pavement that stretched and overlapped like uncertain lines, and somewhere behind Ethan, a voice murmured something low, quickly hushed by another. He straightened his shoulders, the familiar weight of his uniform settling back into place, and though his stance remained firm, there was a subtle change in the way he held himself, less rigid, less absolute. "All right," he said, his voice measured, but quieter now. The edge softened just enough to be noticed if someone was listening closely. "Then we are done here." And the words landed with less authority than he intended, not because they were incorrect, but because they arrived after the moment had already shifted. Naomi gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in submission, just acknowledgement, and she turned slightly toward her car, the movement unhurried, as if there was no need to rush away from something that had already revealed itself. Her hand reached for the driver's side door, fingers brushing the handle, but she did not open it yet, instead pausing for a fraction of a second as if listening to something beyond the surface of the moment. Ethan noticed it, the pause, the stillness that seemed out of place now that everything should have been over, and his gaze followed hers instinctively, scanning the station with a quick, practiced sweep. Though he could not yet identify what had caught her attention, the lights flickered again, just once, casting a brief ripple across the chrome and glass around them. And in that flicker, a new sound slipped into the background, faint at first, almost easy to miss beneath the hum of engines and the shuffle of feet. Naomi's head tilted slightly, her focus sharpening, and her eyes moved past Ethan, toward the far side of the lot where a small sedan had just rolled to an uneven stop near the air pump station, its front wheel turned at an odd angle. Engine still running, but not quite steady. The driver's side door remained closed. But something about the way the car sat, slightly off-center, slightly unsettled, pulled at the edge of attention in a way that did not feel ordinary. Ethan followed her line of sight now, his instincts catching up a half-second behind hers, and he took a step in that direction without fully committing, as if waiting for confirmation that what he sensed was real. The crowd shifted again, a few heads turning, the ripple of awareness spreading slowly, uncertain but growing, and Naomi let go of the door handle, her hand falling back to her side as her body angled subtly toward the sedan. The moment that had belonged to them just seconds ago was already dissolving, replaced by something else, something quieter but heavier, and for the first time since he had approached her, Ethan was no longer the one directing the scene, no longer the center of its gravity. Naomi took a step forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to close a small part of the distance between where she stood and whatever had drawn her attention, and though she did not say a word, the intention in her movement was clear, steady, and unhesitating, like someone who had already decided what mattered before anyone else realized there was a decision to make. The engine of the small sedan did not sound right, not broken exactly, but uneven, like it could not decide whether to keep running or give up, and that hesitation carried across the lot in a low, irregular rhythm that tugged at attention in a way louder noises never could. Naomi Reed moved toward it without urgency, but without doubt. Each step measured, grounded, as if she had learned long ago that rushing rarely helped when something truly mattered, and behind her, the faint echo of shifting feet followed, the crowd adjusting again, drawn now not by confrontation but by something quieter, something uncertain. Officer Ethan Walker took a step after her, then another, his posture still firm but no longer leading. His eyes fixed on the sedan as it idled near the air pump station, headlights casting a narrow beam that cut across the concrete and stopped just short of the curb. The driver's side window was partially down, just a few inches, enough for the faint hum of the engine to escape, but not enough to reveal much inside. And from where they stood, the interior looked dim, shadows layered over shapes that did not immediately resolve. Naomi slowed as she approached, her gaze steady, her breathing even, and when she reached the front of the car, she angled slightly to the side, positioning herself where she could see in without startling whoever might be inside. For a brief moment, nothing changed. The engine continued its uneven rhythm, the lights continued their soft buzz, and the world seemed to hold in that thin space between noticing and understanding. Then Naomi's eyes sharpened, just slightly, the kind of shift that came from recognition, not assumption, and she stepped closer to the window, lifting her hand not to knock, but to rest lightly against the edge of the door frame, grounding herself in the physical space of the moment. "Hey," she said, her voice low and calm, not demanding attention, just offering it. The single word carrying enough steadiness to cut through confusion without adding pressure. Inside the car, a small movement flickered, subtle, almost missed, but real enough to confirm that someone was there, and Naomi leaned just enough to see past the reflection of the station lights on the glass. In the back seat, barely visible in the dim light, a boy sat slumped slightly to one side, his seatbelt still fastened, his head tilted at an angle that did not look comfortable, his small hands resting loosely in his lap, as if they had simply stopped mid-motion. The driver's seat was empty, the door closed, keys still in the ignition, and for a second, the scene did not fully make sense. Pieces present, but not yet connected. Ethan moved closer now, his steps quicker, his focus narrowing as the details came into view, and when he reached Naomi's side, the shift in his expression was immediate, not controlled, not measured, just raw recognition breaking through the structure he usually held. "Lucas," he said, the name leaving his mouth before he could contain it, softer than his earlier commands, but heavier, weighted with something deeper than authority. Naomi did not look at him, not yet, her attention still on the boy, her mind already moving ahead of the moment, assessing, connecting, deciding. She reached for the door handle, testing it gently, and when it did not give, she glanced toward Ethan just long enough to register his presence, his urgency, the sudden vulnerability that had replaced the certainty he carried minutes before. "Is it locked?" she asked, her tone steady, practical, not reacting to his fear, but moving through it. Ethan fumbled slightly, reaching for his keys, his movements faster now, less precise, the calm control slipping under the weight of what he was seeing, and with a quick press, the car unlocked with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the tightening silence. Naomi opened the door carefully, slow enough not to startle, wide enough to reach inside, and the cool night air slipped into the car, brushing against the boy's face, lifting a strand of hair that fell across his forehead. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice lowering even more, the tone shifting from observation to connection. "Can you hear me?" And though there was no immediate response, something in the stillness shifted, subtle but present. Ethan stood just behind her now, close enough to see everything, close enough to feel the distance between what he knew how to handle and what was happening in front of him, his hands hovering slightly, unsure where to go, what to do, the structure of his role offering no clear instructions in this moment. Naomi reached in, not grabbing, not pulling, just placing her hand lightly near the boy's shoulder, careful, deliberate, and the entire scene seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. The hum of the lights fading, the murmurs of the crowd softening, until all that remained was the quiet space where a decision had already been made, long before anyone else understood there was one to make. Naomi Reed did not rush, even as the weight of the moment pressed in from every side, her hand still resting lightly near the boy's shoulder, her eyes focused not on the fear around her, but on the small details that mattered, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the slight tension in his fingers, the angle of his head against the seatbelt strap. "Lucas," Ethan Walker said again, closer this time, his voice breaking at the edges in a way that did not belong to the uniform he wore, and he leaned in, one hand braced against the car frame, the other hovering uncertainly as if he wanted to help but did not know where to begin. Naomi glanced at him briefly now, just enough to take in his expression, the shift from control to concern, from authority to something far more human, and then her attention returned to the boy as she adjusted her position slightly, lowering herself so her line of sight matched his, bringing her presence into his world instead of pulling him into hers. "Lucas," she repeated, softer, steady, her tone carrying a calm rhythm that did not demand a response but invited one, and she gently moved her hand to rest more securely against his upper arm, not gripping, not shaking, just a firm, reassuring contact. The boy's head shifted a fraction, barely noticeable, but enough to signal awareness beneath the stillness, and Naomi's focus sharpened, her movements becoming more precise, more intentional, as if a quiet switch had flipped inside her. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but clear, no hesitation in using his name now. "I need you to stay right here with me." And the way she said it was not a request, not an order, but something in between, something grounded in purpose. Ethan nodded quickly, almost instinctively, his earlier certainty replaced by a willingness to follow, to listen, his eyes fixed on Lucas as if nothing else in the world existed beyond that small back seat. Naomi reached across carefully, guiding the seatbelt away from the boy's neck just enough to ease the tension without removing it entirely, her fingers moving with practiced control, each adjustment small but deliberate, and the crowd behind them fell even quieter, the earlier murmurs fading into a soft, distant presence as attention narrowed to the open car door. A breeze moved through the station again, carrying the faint scent of rubber and gasoline, brushing against Naomi's cheek as she leaned in slightly closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You are okay, Lucas, just stay with me." And though the words were simple, they carried a steadiness that seemed to anchor the moment itself. Ethan swallowed hard, his hand finally lowering to rest against the edge of the door, gripping it as if he needed something solid to hold on to. And he watched Naomi with a mixture of urgency and disbelief, trying to understand how she moved so calmly through something that had already unraveled him. Naomi shifted her stance again, one foot grounding her balance on the pavement, while her upper body leaned just enough into the car to maintain contact, her eyes scanning Lucas's face, his breathing, the subtle cues that spoke louder than any words could, and then she exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that seemed to reset the rhythm of everything around her. "He is with us," she said quietly, more to Ethan than to herself, and the words landed like a small but crucial step forward, not resolution, but direction. Ethan nodded again, though his hand still trembled slightly, the structure he relied on offering no script for this, and he found himself watching her instead, following her cues, his attention pulled into the steady pace she set. Naomi adjusted her hand once more, this time placing it lightly against Lucas's wrist, feeling for a response. Her expression focused but not tense, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch, each second expanding under the weight of waiting. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lucas's fingers twitched, a small movement that broke through the stillness like a signal returning after silence, and Naomi's shoulders eased just a fraction, her voice remaining calm as she spoke again. "That is it, Lucas. Stay right here," her words guiding, not pushing. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, the sound uneven but quiet, and he leaned in just a little closer, careful now, aware of the space Naomi had created and the role she had taken without ever announcing it. The station lights hummed above them, steady once more, and the crowd remained at a distance, no longer pressing forward, no longer whispering, just watching as the moment unfolded in a way none of them had expected. And in that quiet space, something fundamental had shifted, not in words, not in declarations, but in the simple, undeniable fact that the woman he had misjudged minutes ago was now the one holding everything together. The slight movement in Lucas's fingers lingered like a fragile signal, something small but undeniable, and Naomi Reed stayed exactly where she was, her hand steady at his wrist, her focus locked not on the fear surrounding them, but on the rhythm she was trying to maintain, slow, consistent, grounding. "That is good," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet reassurance that seemed to settle into the space between each breath the boy took. "Just stay with me." And though her tone never rose, it reached him in a way that urgency never could. Ethan Walker leaned closer, his posture no longer rigid, his shoulders slightly rounded forward as if the weight of the moment had pulled him out of the structure he relied on, and his eyes moved rapidly between Naomi's hands and Lucas's face, searching for something he could understand, something he could hold on to. "What is happening?" he asked, his voice low, almost uncertain. The question less about facts and more about needing direction, needing someone to tell him where to stand in a moment he could not control. Naomi did not look up immediately, her attention still on Lucas, her fingers adjusting just slightly against the boy's wrist, feeling the subtle pattern there. And when she spoke, her words were simple, measured. "He is overwhelmed, maybe dehydrated, maybe just too much at once, but he is still here." And the clarity in her tone cut through the confusion without adding to it. Ethan nodded, though the explanation only partially reached him, his mind still catching up, still trying to reconcile the shift from confrontation to dependence that had happened in a matter of minutes. And his hand tightened slightly on the edge of the door, grounding himself in the only physical point that felt stable. Naomi reached into the front pocket of her jacket with her free hand, pulling out a small, worn cloth, its edges frayed from use, and she folded it once before gently dabbing Lucas's forehead, her movements slow and deliberate, each one placed with intention rather than urgency. The cool night air moved through the open door, brushing against them, carrying the faint hum of the station back into focus, but it no longer felt intrusive, just part of the background to something more important. "Lucas," she said again, her voice steady. "Can you hear me? I need you to take a slow breath." And she demonstrated it, her own breathing visible in the rise and fall of her shoulders, giving him something to follow rather than something to react to. For a moment, nothing changed, the stillness stretching just long enough to test patience. And then, gradually, Lucas's chest rose a little deeper, the breath uneven but present, a response that was not perfect but real. Naomi's expression softened just slightly, not relief exactly, but recognition that they were moving in the right direction, and she adjusted her stance again, bringing her presence even closer without crowding him, her voice continuing in that same calm rhythm. "That is it. Just like that, one at a time." Ethan watched her, the disbelief in his eyes shifting into something else, something quieter, more reflective, as if he was beginning to understand not just what she was doing, but how she was doing it, the patience, the precision, the absence of panic. He glanced at his son again, then back at Naomi, his voice catching slightly as he spoke. "I did not know what to do." And the admission hung there, simple and unguarded, stripped of the authority he had carried earlier. Naomi did not respond to the statement directly, not because she ignored it, but because the moment did not need words about the past, it needed focus on the present. And she continued guiding Lucas through each small step, each breath, each quiet return to awareness. The crowd behind them had shifted again, no longer pressing in, no longer recording as actively, some lowering their phones, others stepping back entirely, as if recognizing that what was happening was not something to capture, but something to give space. The station lights hummed steadily above, casting a consistent glow now, no longer flickering, and the shadows across the pavement settled into stillness. Naomi moved her hand from Lucas's wrist to his shoulder again, a gentle, reassuring contact, and she leaned in just enough for her voice to reach him clearly without carrying. Beyond the car, "You are doing good, Lucas, just stay right here with me." And in that moment, the entire scene seemed to center around that quiet exchange, the earlier tension, the confrontation, the assumptions all fading into the background as something more important took their place. Ethan stood beside her, no longer leading, no longer questioning, just present, his role reduced to what mattered most, being there, watching, learning, and in that quiet shift, something inside him began to change, not all at once, not in words, but in the simple realization that the person he had misjudged minutes ago was now the one showing him what it meant to hold a moment together when everything else was ready to fall apart. The rhythm of Lucas's breathing began to change in a way that was no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, and Naomi Reed felt it before she saw it. The subtle shift beneath her fingertips as his chest rose a little more evenly, each inhale less shallow than the one before, and she stayed right there with him, her presence steady, her voice low and consistent. That is it. Just keep going, one breath at a time. And the words moved through the small space inside the car like a quiet metronome. Something to follow, something to trust. The cool night air continued to drift through the open door, brushing against their skin, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft buzz of the station lights. But none of it disrupted the focus that had settled over the moment. Ethan Walker shifted slightly beside her, his stance no longer uncertain but still restrained, careful not to interrupt the fragile balance Naomi had created. His eyes fixed on his son's face, searching for every sign, every change, every indication that things were moving in the right direction. "Lucas," he said softly now, his voice no longer sharp or commanding, but careful, almost tentative, like he was learning how to speak in a language he had never needed before. And though the word carried more emotion than structure, it did not break the rhythm Naomi had set. Naomi nodded slightly, without looking away, acknowledging him while keeping her focus where it needed to be, and she adjusted her hand again, guiding Lucas's shoulder just enough to help him sit a little more upright without forcing the movement. Her touch precise, practiced, the kind that came from experience rather than instinct alone. The boy's head lifted slightly, just a fraction, his posture shifting in response, and his breathing followed, still uneven but no longer distant, no longer slipping away from them, and Naomi's voice remained calm, unwavering. "That is good. Lucas, stay with me. You are doing exactly what you need to do." And the reassurance settled into the moment like a steady foundation beneath uncertain ground. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just enough to let the breath out fully, and he found himself watching Naomi's movements more closely now, noticing the small details he had missed before, the way she timed her words with Lucas's breathing, the way her posture remained grounded, balanced, never rushed, never reactive. The crowd had nearly dissolved into the background, most of them stepping back, some returning to their cars, others lingering at a distance with a quieter awareness, no longer spectators of conflict, but witnesses to something quieter, something more human. Naomi reached toward the center console, her fingers moving with quiet confidence as she adjusted the air vents slightly, directing a gentle flow toward Lucas, not enough to startle, just enough to keep the air moving. And then she returned her hand to his shoulder, maintaining that steady point of contact. "Look at me, Lucas," she said gently, her voice soft but clear, and for a moment, nothing happened, the stillness stretching just long enough to test patience again. And then slowly, his eyes shifted, not fully focused, not entirely clear, but moving toward the sound of her voice, responding in the simplest way that mattered most. Naomi held that moment, did not rush it, did not push for more, just allowed it to exist, her expression calm, her presence unwavering, and she nodded slightly. "That is it. You are right here." And the words carried a quiet certainty that did not need to be explained. Ethan leaned in a little closer now, careful, controlled, his earlier urgency replaced by something steadier, and he reached out slowly, placing his hand lightly on the edge of the seat near Lucas, not touching him directly, but close enough to be there, to be present without overwhelming the space Naomi had created. His voice came again, softer this time. "I am here, son." And though the words were simple, they carried a weight that had not been there before, a grounding that matched the rhythm Naomi had set rather than disrupting it. The station lights hummed above them, constant now, and the shadows around the car seemed less sharp, less fractured, as if the tension that had once filled the space had begun to dissolve into something quieter, something steadier. Naomi adjusted her stance once more, shifting her weight slightly to stay balanced, her attention still fully on Lucas, and she spoke again, her tone unchanged. "We are going to stay right here for a minute, just breathing, just letting your body catch up." And the words guided the moment forward without forcing it. Ethan nodded, though she had not asked him to, his focus aligned now, his presence no longer uncertain but supportive, and in that quiet alignment, something deeper settled into place, not spoken, not acknowledged directly, but undeniable. Naomi remained exactly where she needed to be, steady, calm, unshaken, and as Lucas's breathing continued to even out, as his posture steadied just a little more, the moment shifted again, not with sudden change, but with quiet progress, the kind that could only be felt if you were paying close enough attention to notice it. Lucas's eyes did not fully open, not yet, but they no longer drifted without focus, no longer lost somewhere distant. And Naomi Reed caught that change the moment it happened, the subtle way his gaze steadied just enough to recognize presence, to respond to it. And she held that moment carefully, not pushing it further, not demanding more than he could give, her voice remaining soft and even. "That is it, Lucas. Just stay with me. You are doing exactly right." And her words settled into the rhythm of his breathing like a guide rather than a command. The air inside the car felt different now, less tight, less fragile, and the quiet hum of the engine no longer sounded like something uncertain, but simply part of the background again, steady, predictable, no longer pulling attention away from what mattered. Ethan Walker shifted his weight slightly, his stance more grounded now, his earlier tension replaced by a quiet focus, and he watched his son with an intensity that no longer came from fear alone, but from awareness, from being fully present in a moment he could not control but could still witness. "Lucas," he said again, softer this time, matching Naomi's tone without realizing it, his voice carrying something new, something unguarded. "Look at me, son." And though the words were simple, they held a steadiness that had not been there before. Naomi glanced at him briefly, just a flicker, acknowledging the shift, then returned her attention to Lucas, her hand still resting lightly on his shoulder, her presence unwavering, and she adjusted her position just enough to give Ethan space to be seen without overwhelming the balance she had built. Lucas's breathing continued to even out, each inhale deeper, each exhale more controlled, and his head lifted a little more this time, not fully upright, but no longer slumped, and his eyes moved again, this time finding something, focusing just enough to recognize the shapes in front of him, the outlines of two figures leaning in, waiting, steady. Naomi nodded slightly, her voice still low, still calm. "That is it, you are right here with us." And the reassurance did not rush the moment. It simply held it in place. A car door closed somewhere in the distance, the sound sharp but quickly fading, and the station lights continued their steady hum above, casting a consistent glow that no longer flickered, no longer disrupted the scene. The crowd had thinned even more now, most people returning to their own routines, though a few remained at a respectful distance, their attention quieter, no longer intrusive, just aware. Ethan leaned in just a little closer, careful, his movements slower now, more deliberate, and he finally placed his hand gently on Lucas's arm, the contact light, tentative, as if he was asking permission without words. And when there was no resistance, no withdrawal, something inside him eased, just a fraction, but enough to matter. Naomi watched the interaction without interrupting, her role shifting subtly, no longer the only anchor in the moment, but still the one holding its center, and she spoke again, her tone guiding rather than directing. "He is coming back, just give him a second." And the simplicity of the words carried more weight than any explanation could. Lucas blinked. Slowly, once, then again. The movement small but clear, and his breathing followed, steady now, no longer uneven, no longer distant, and his gaze settled more fully, recognizing, processing, returning. Ethan exhaled quietly, the sound almost lost beneath the hum of the lights, and his shoulders dropped slightly, the tension that had held him rigid finally loosening, replaced by something quieter, something more grounded. Naomi reached for the cloth again, gently brushing it across Lucas's forehead once more, not because it was necessary, but because it maintained the rhythm, the care, the presence that had carried them this far, and she leaned in just enough to speak directly to him. "You are okay, Lucas. Just stay right here. You are doing good." And the words were not dramatic, not urgent, just steady, consistent, the kind that built trust rather than demanded it. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, not as an interruption, not as a question, but as the person who had held this moment together when he could not. And there was something in his expression now that had not been there before, something quieter than apology, deeper than acknowledgement, a recognition that did not need to be spoken yet. Naomi did not return the look, not because she ignored it, but because the moment still belonged to Lucas, and she remained focused, steady, present, her hand still resting lightly on his shoulder as his breathing continued to settle into a calm, even rhythm. And in that quiet space, the tension that had once filled the gas station had fully shifted into something else, something softer, something real, where no one needed to speak for the truth of the moment to be understood. Lucas's eyes settled more fully now, no longer drifting, no longer searching without direction, and when they finally focused, they landed somewhere between Naomi Reed and Ethan Walker, as if his mind was still catching up to where his body had already returned, and for a brief moment, he simply stayed there, breathing steady, looking without speaking. Naomi did not rush to fill the silence. She did not ask questions, did not push for confirmation. She just remained present, her hand still, resting lightly on his shoulder, her posture grounded, her voice soft when she spoke again. "You are okay, Lucas, just take your time." And the words were not instructions, they were permission to come back at his own pace. Ethan leaned closer, his hand still gently placed on Lucas's arm, and now that his son's eyes were open, the reality of the moment seemed to settle deeper into him. The fear that had driven him replaced by something quieter, something heavier, and his voice, when it came, was careful, almost unsure. "Hey, buddy," he said, each word slow, measured. "I am right here." And there was no command in it, no authority, just presence. Lucas blinked again, slower this time, and his lips parted slightly as if he was about to speak, but no words came yet, only a soft breath that carried more awareness than before, and Naomi nodded slightly, acknowledging the progress without naming it. Her attention still steady, still focused on what mattered. The engine of the car continued its low hum, consistent now, no longer uneven, and the station around them had returned to a quieter rhythm, cars coming and going, footsteps passing at a distance, but none of it pulled focus away from the small space inside the open door where everything had shifted. Naomi moved her hand gently from Lucas's shoulder to the side of the seat, giving him just a little more room, a subtle signal that he was regaining control, that he no longer needed the same level of support, and her voice followed that shift, still calm, but lighter now. "That is it, just stay with your breathing." And she demonstrated again, slow, steady, matching the rhythm he had found. Ethan watched her, not with confusion anymore, but with a kind of quiet attention that came from learning, from recognizing something he had not understood before, and he adjusted his own breathing without realizing it, matching the pace she had set, grounding himself the same way she had grounded Lucas. For a moment, none of them spoke, the silence no longer heavy, no longer uncertain, but calm, like a surface that had settled after being disturbed. And in that stillness, Lucas's gaze shifted again, this time more deliberately, moving fully to Ethan, recognizing him. And there was a faint change in his expression, not dramatic, not sudden, just a small tightening around the eyes, a subtle awareness returning. "Dad," he said quietly, the words soft, almost fragile, but clear, and it carried through the space between them with more weight than anything else had, and Ethan's breath caught, just for a second, before he nodded quickly, his hand tightening slightly on the edge of the seat. "Yeah, I am here," he replied, his voice steady but lower than before, as if he was careful not to disrupt what had just been restored. Naomi watched the exchange without stepping in, her role shifting again, no longer guiding every movement, but holding the space open, making sure nothing rushed, nothing broke the quiet balance that had formed. She reached for the cloth once more, lightly brushing it across Lucas's forehead, more out of habit now than necessity. And then she stepped back just a fraction, creating a little more space between herself and the car, her presence still there, but less central, allowing the connection between father and son to take its place. Ethan glanced at her then, briefly, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment, and there was something in that look that had not been there before, something unspoken but clear, a recognition that went beyond the situation itself. And though he did not say anything, the shift was there, undeniable. Naomi gave a small nod, not as acknowledgement of him, but of the moment, of what had been done, of what had changed, and she turned slightly, her body angling away from the car, as if preparing to step back completely, her role fulfilled. Without needing to be named, behind them, the station continued its quiet rhythm, the lights steady, the air still, and in that calm, the earlier tension felt distant, almost unreal, replaced by something simpler, something grounded, where no words were needed to explain what had just happened, because the truth of it was already clear in the way everything had settled. Ethan Walker did not move right away, even as Naomi Reed began to step back, even as the space between them shifted from shared urgency to quiet resolution, because something inside him had not yet settled, something that could not simply return to normal just because the moment had passed. His hand remained on the edge of the seat, fingers resting against the worn fabric as if letting go too quickly might undo what had just been held together, and his eyes moved once more from Lucas to Naomi, following her as she turned slightly away, her posture calm, unburdened, as though she had never been at the center of everything only minutes ago. "Wait," he said, the word leaving him before he could measure it, not loud, not commanding, just enough to stop the moment from fully closing, and Naomi paused, not immediately turning back, but not continuing either, her stillness carrying the same quiet control she had held from the beginning. The station lights hummed above them, steady and indifferent, and the distant sound of a car pulling out of a nearby pump filled the brief silence that followed, the world continuing as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Naomi turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without fully re-entering the space, her expression neutral, open, neither inviting nor dismissing, simply present. Ethan straightened slowly, his posture no longer defined by authority, but by something more uncertain, more human, and he stepped back from the car just enough to face her properly, his hand dropping to his side, as if releasing the last physical hold he had on the moment. For a second, he said nothing, the words not coming as easily as they once did, the certainty he relied on replaced by something quieter, something that required more than instinct. "I was wrong," he said finally, the sentence simple, unpolished, without explanation or defense, and it settled into the air between them with a weight that did not need to be emphasized. Naomi looked at him fully now, her gaze steady, not surprised, not softened, just attentive, as if she was listening to what he meant rather than how he said it. The faint breeze moved through again, lifting a corner of her jacket, carrying the scent of fuel and asphalt, grounding the moment in something real, something unchanged. Ethan continued, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "About you, about what I thought, about how I handled it." And though he did not elaborate, the meaning was clear, not in the details, but in the shift behind the words. Naomi held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not acceptance, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement, the kind that recognized the statement without needing to respond to it. And she let the silence return, allowing the moment to stand on its own. Behind them, Lucas shifted slightly in the back seat, his movement more natural now, more controlled, and Ethan glanced back instinctively, the reflex of a parent grounding him again, reminding him where his attention belonged. Naomi noticed the shift and stepped back another small distance, her role continuing to recede without announcement, her presence no longer central but still steady. "You should get him some water," she said quietly, her voice practical, focused on what came next rather than what had already happened, "and give him a few minutes before you drive." And the guidance was simple, clear, offered without expectation. Ethan nodded quickly, the instruction landing more easily than anything else, and he turned slightly toward the car, reaching for a bottle from the front seat, his movements more composed now, more aligned with the moment rather than fighting against it. When he looked back again, Naomi had already begun to turn away, her steps measured, unhurried, as if leaving was just another part of the process, not something that needed to be marked or recognized. "Naomi," he said, the name unfamiliar on his tongue but certain, and she paused again, this time, without turning immediately, the space between them holding just long enough for the moment to register. "Thank you," he added, the words quieter than everything that had come before, but more certain, more grounded, and when she finally looked back, there was no change in her expression, no visible reaction, just that same calm presence that had carried through everything. She gave a small nod, nothing more, and then she continued walking, her figure moving back toward the row of pumps, toward the car she had left behind, blending again into the ordinary rhythm of the station as if she had never stood at the center of anything at all. Ethan watched her for a moment longer, not with confusion, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something reflective, and then he turned back to Lucas, opening the bottle, his movements careful, his voice softer now as he spoke to his son, and in that quiet shift, something inside him had already begun to change, not in a way that could be measured or explained, but in a way that would stay with him long after the lights of the gas station faded behind them. The bottle cap twisted open with a soft click that seemed louder in the quiet that followed, and Ethan Walker held it for a second before passing it back carefully, his hand steady now in a way it had not been earlier, while Lucas reached for it with both hands, slower than usual, but sure enough to show he was fully present again, and the simple act of lifting it to his lips carried more meaning than anything either of them could have said. The water moved, a small ripple inside the plastic, catching the overhead light as Lucas took a careful sip, then another, and Ethan watched every movement, not with panic anymore, but with a kind of quiet attention that came from understanding how close something had come to slipping away. "Easy," he said softly, his voice measured, matching the calm that had settled over the moment, and Lucas nodded slightly, the motion small but certain, his breathing steady now, his posture more upright as he leaned back into the seat. The engine continued, its low hum, consistent and ordinary again, and the air inside the car felt less heavy, less uncertain, as if the tension that had filled it earlier had been carried out with each breath Lucas had taken under Naomi Reed's steady guidance. Ethan rested his hand lightly against the back of the seat, not gripping anymore, not holding on, just there, present, and for a moment he said nothing, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, just quiet, just real. Lucas lowered the bottle slightly, his eyes clearer now, focused, and he looked at his father again, really looked this time, and there was a faint crease in his expression, a question forming without words. "I am okay," Lucas said softly, his voice still a little thin but steady enough, and Ethan nodded quickly, the relief in his expression controlled but visible. "I know," he replied, his tone calm, grounded. "You did good." And the words were simple, but they carried weight, not just for Lucas, but for himself as well. Outside the car, the station had almost returned to normal, a few cars pulling in, others leaving, the rhythm of the place settling back into something familiar. But Ethan remained where he was, his attention still anchored to the moment, still processing something that had not yet fully formed into words. He glanced toward the pumps, toward where Naomi had walked away, but she was no longer immediately visible, her presence already folded back into the ordinary flow of the station, and the absence felt noticeable, not because she had left, but because of what she had carried with her. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing as he leaned slightly against the car door, his posture no longer defensive, no longer rigid, and he ran a hand briefly across his face, a small gesture, almost absent, but it lingered just long enough to show the weight of what he was thinking. "We are going to sit here for a minute," he said quietly, more to himself than to Lucas, though the words reached both of them. And Lucas nodded again, taking another small sip of water before resting the bottle in his lap. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow across the interior, illuminating small details that had gone unnoticed before, the edge of a notebook on the seat, a pair of sunglasses tucked into the console, ordinary things that now felt grounded in a moment that had shifted everything around them. Ethan looked down at his hands for a second, then back at Lucas, and there was something different in his gaze now, something quieter, more reflective, as if he was seeing not just his son, but the space between what had happened and what could have happened, and the difference that one person had made in that space. Lucas leaned his head back against the seat, his breathing even, his eyes half-lidded but aware, and he looked out the window briefly, the station lights reflecting in the glass, then back at his father. "Who was that?" he asked softly, the question simple, but carrying curiosity rather than confusion. Ethan paused, the answer not immediate, not because he did not know her name, but because what she was could not be reduced to a single word, and after a moment he said quietly, "Someone who helped us." And the simplicity of it felt right, even if it did not say. Everything. Lucas nodded, accepting the answer without needing more, and the silence returned again, but this time it was different, not something waiting to be filled, just something that existed, steady and complete. Outside, the faint sound of footsteps passed by, a door closing, an engine starting, and the world moved forward as it always did. But inside the car, something had already changed. Something that would not simply reset when they drove away, something that would stay with Ethan. Long after the lights of the station disappeared behind them, not as a lesson spoken aloud, but as a quiet understanding that had taken root in a moment he would not forget. The quiet inside the car lingered, not empty, but settled, like everything had found its place without needing to be arranged, and Ethan Walker remained there for a moment longer than necessary, his hand resting lightly against the steering wheel now, his fingers tapping once, then stilling, as if he was deciding whether to move forward or stay inside the space that had just been rebuilt. Lucas shifted beside him, adjusting the seatbelt across his chest, the movement slow but natural, and he took another small sip of water before setting the bottle in the cup holder, his breathing steady, his eyes clearer, the earlier haze fully gone. "I feel better," Lucas said quietly, not as a question, not as reassurance, just a simple statement, and Ethan nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at him. "I can see that," he replied, his voice calm, grounded, but there was something else beneath it now, something reflective, something that had not been there before. Outside, the gas station lights stretched across the pavement in long pale lines, the glow catching on the edges of passing cars, on the chrome of bumpers, on the glass of windows, and everything moved with a quiet normalcy that felt almost distant compared to what had just happened. Ethan glanced once more toward the pumps, his eyes scanning instinctively, searching not out of urgency, but out of something quieter, something unfinished. And though Naomi Reed was no longer standing where she had been, there was a trace of her presence in the way he looked, in the way his attention lingered just a second longer than it needed to. He exhaled slowly, leaning back into the seat, his shoulders settling, and for a moment he closed his eyes, not to escape, but to hold on to the clarity that had come with the stillness, the kind of clarity that did not arrive often, and did not stay unless you let it. When he opened them again, the world looked the same, but it did not feel the same. And that difference was quiet, but undeniable. Lucas glanced at him, studying his expression with a kind of curiosity that only came from noticing something had changed without fully understanding what, and he tilted his head slightly. "Are we going home?" he asked, his voice steady now, the question simple, grounded in the ordinary rhythm of their lives. Ethan paused for just a second, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, his tone gentle. "We are going home." But he did not reach for the gear shift yet. He did not start to drive. Instead, he let the moment stretch just a little longer, as if leaving too quickly might erase something important. His eyes moved again toward the station, toward the space Naomi had walked through, and there was a flicker of something in his expression, not regret exactly, not even guilt in the way it might have been earlier, but something deeper, something that sat quieter, something that did not demand attention but would not disappear either. He thought about the way she had moved, the way she had spoken, the way she had not raised her voice, had not demanded recognition, had not asked for anything in return, and how in the middle of everything, she had chosen to step forward when she could have just as easily walked away. His hand tightened slightly on the steering wheel, not out of tension, but out of awareness, as if he was holding on to something that could not be seen, and then slowly, deliberately, he reached for the ignition, his movements measured, no longer automatic. The engine responded with a soft shift, the hum changing just enough to signal readiness, and the headlights cast a longer beam across the lot, stretching toward the exit. Lucas settled back into his seat, his posture relaxed now, his breathing even, his eyes drifting briefly toward the window before returning forward, and the simplicity of his presence grounded the moment again. Ethan glanced at him one more time, then back at the road ahead, and for a second, he did not move, the car idling quietly, the world waiting without urgency. Then, finally, he eased his foot onto the pedal, guiding the car forward with a smooth, controlled motion. And as they rolled past the pumps, past the space where everything had shifted, his eyes flickered once more to the side, just long enough to acknowledge it, not to hold on to it, but not to forget it either. The station lights began to fall behind them, shrinking in the rearview mirror, blending back into the darkness of the road. But the moment itself did not fade with them. It stayed, quiet and steady, carried forward not in words, not in explanations, but in the simple, undeniable way something inside him had changed, something that would not be undone by distance or time, something that would remain long after the night itself had passed. The road stretched out ahead in a quiet ribbon of dim streetlights and fading reflections, the hum of the engine steady beneath Ethan Walker's hands, as he guided the car through the empty lanes. And for a while, neither he nor Lucas spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence itself had become something meaningful, something that did not need to be filled. The glow of the dashboard cast a soft light across Ethan's face, outlining the subtle tension that still lingered in his jaw, though it was no longer sharp, no longer defensive, just there, like a reminder of something he had not yet fully let go of. Lucas shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting the strap across his chest. His movements relaxed now, his breathing even, and he glanced out the window as the last of the gas station lights disappeared behind them, replaced by the quiet darkness of the road. "Dad," he said softly after a while, his voice steady, no longer fragile, just curious, and Ethan glanced at him briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Yeah," he answered, his tone calm, grounded, but attentive. Lucas hesitated for a second, as if searching for the right words, then asked, "Why did she help us?" And the question settled into the car with a quiet weight, not accusatory, not confused, just honest. Ethan did not answer immediately, his grip on the steering wheel tightening just slightly before easing again, and his eyes flickered briefly toward the rearview mirror, though there was nothing there but darkness and the faint glow of distant headlights. He thought about the moment again, the way Naomi Reed had stepped forward without hesitation, the way she had spoken, the way she had not asked for anything, and for the first time, he allowed himself to sit fully with what that meant. Because she could have walked away, he said slowly, choosing each word carefully, and she did not. And his voice carried a quiet certainty, not loud, not forceful, just true. Lucas nodded slightly, accepting the answer in a way that only children could, without needing it to be more complicated than it was, and he leaned back into his seat, his eyes drifting toward the passing lights again, the rhythm of the car steady beneath him. The silence returned, but it felt different now, less like a pause and more like something complete, something that had already said what needed to be said. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders settling deeper into the seat, and his mind moved back to the moment he had first approached Naomi, the certainty in his voice, the assumptions he had carried, and the contrast between that version of himself and the one sitting here now was not dramatic, not overwhelming, but it was real, and it stayed with him in a way that would not fade with distance. His hands adjusted slightly on the wheel, not out of habit, but out of awareness, and his gaze remained steady on the road ahead. But something in the way he held that focus had changed, something quieter, something more deliberate. The faint sound of a passing car moved through the opposite lane, headlights briefly illuminating the interior before fading again, and for a moment, the reflection caught in the window showed a different version of him, not defined by the uniform, not framed by authority, but by something simpler, something more human. Lucas shifted again, settling into a more comfortable position, his breathing slow and even, and within minutes, his eyes began to close, the weight of the evening finally catching up with him, and Ethan glanced over briefly, watching him for a second before returning his attention to the road. The city lights began to appear in the distance now, faint at first, then clearer, outlining the path home. And Ethan guided the car forward without hesitation, his movements smooth, controlled, but no longer rigid, no longer driven by the need to assert anything beyond the simple act of getting them where they needed to go. The memory of the gas station did not fade behind him. It remained, not as something loud or intrusive, but as something quiet, something steady, something that had settled into him without asking permission. And as the car moved forward into the night, there was no dramatic realization, no sudden shift, just a quiet understanding that did not need to be spoken, something that would stay with him long after the road ended. long after the lights went out, something that had already begun to change the way he saw the world, not all at once, not in a single moment, but in the slow, steady way that mattered most.